I'm Sarah Fensky, and this is the 314. Every episode, we sit down with St. Louisans who know what makes this place tick. Together, we explore why things are the way they are and how we can make them better. This episode of the 314 podcast is sponsored by Sea Edge Learn. Megan Green was elected president of the St. Louis Board of Aldermen 2.5 years ago, part of a progressive wave then ascendant in the city. But voters have grown impatient with poor city services and last month seemingly took out their anger at the ballot box in last month's primary. Megan Green's own ward went from supporting Mayor Tashara Jones in 2021 to choosing her more conservative rival by a wide margin. As Mayor Jones faces an April 8th rematch with Alderwoman Kara Spencer, Megan Green joined me earlier this week. She shared her thoughts on the race, the state of the progressive movement, and what it will take to fix city services. She also explained why she's now glad that the plans for the Rams settlement funds fell apart. Now, after Megan Green, we'll be joined by St. Louis Magazine staff writer Ryan Kroll. He has insight into a slow-simmering issue at City Hall that could make voters even angrier. But first, let's hear from President Megan Green. President Megan Green, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So early voting, well underway in the city right now. How are you feeling going into this general election?
I do feel like more people are waking up to the fact that there is an election, which is a good thing. I mean, we had very low voter turnout in the primary, which was pretty concerning. So, I'm hoping that we can get at least 30% or more voter turnout.
That's what you're aiming for right now.
That's what, that would be good in a local election, as sad as it is. But what I think folks need to realize is these local elections often impact them more than state and federal elections. And so it's important to turn out. It's important to, make your voice heard even in these very, quote unquote, small elections.
Yeah, you'd think in like a deep blue city like St. Louis, where let's face it, like in many state elections, we don't have much say in what's going on. In many federal elections, St. Louis is just kind of flushing its votes. And yet there's not that big turnout. What do you think that is? Is that a mindset problem?
I think it's more of people are used to hearing about federal politics every single day. And I think there's just a lot less knowledge and information about local politics and the impact it has on folks. I mean, looking back at the November election, and we had a series of charter amendments on the ballot. And one of them was asking, for the Board of Aldermen to get back budget authority, something that I think most people think that the board already has. But one of the things we found when we were knocking doors is folks were like, well, what is a Board of Aldermen?
Oh, wow.
And because we were dealing with a much bigger electorate, right?
People turn out in November.
Right. For a presidential election, there's a much higher turnout. And so we started realizing, okay, there's a lot of education that needs to happen still in our community for folks to, understand how local government works, who are the players in local government and why it really matters to them.
Yeah, what is the Board of Aldermen? That's a terrifying question. Have you been out heading into this April election? Have you been out canvassing, talking to voters?
I have been out knocking some doors. And, what you hear from folks is, I think, just general discontentment with everything. I think that the constant chaos and stress from the Trump administration is definitely being felt. I think folks are eager for things to get better, and they don't want to wait for it. And that's kind of what we're hearing across the board.
So there has been some speculation in recent months that sort of this progressive groundswell that you were a big part of, maybe even the standard bearer for, that this could be over in the city. Congressman Cori Bush got ousted. Kim Gardner left office in disgrace. And in March, voters turned on Mayor Tashara Jones, who'd also been part of that same movement. Do you think city voters are sending a message they don't like where that movement took them?
I actually don't. I think if we go back to Cori Bush's election, for example, she won the city, and she won the city by quite a bit, actually, in spite of the massive amounts of money and disinformation that was put against her. I think that the electorate is no less progressive than it was a couple years ago. But what I do think the electorate is more impatient and wanting to see the changes that everybody is promising and talking about, happen yesterday. And that's difficult. I mean, we are an old city that has a lot of very antiquated policies that make doing anything very slow. We have a weak mayor system that means that mayors don't have unilateral authority to do things like hire staff or raise wages, and that a mayor has to share power across the president, the board, and the comptroller. And so I think that there's understandably so an urgency that we're feeling from residents in the city, which is at times, I think, at odds with just the structure of our government, which is one of the reasons, at the Board of Aldermen, we created a special committee on charter revisions. We recognized that the work that the Charter Commission did over a year was not enough time. They came forward with a lot of great ideas, and they did a lot of good background work. And they came to us and they said, going forward, we need to recognize that this can't get done in a year if we're really going to do the amount of changes that we need to do. So we've picked up that work. We've engaged other offices across city government, our county offices, in addition to, the mayor's office and the comptroller's office, to figure out going forward, how do we need to change our foundational document to make it easier to get things done in the city?
So I like this argument. I do see many ways that the form of government that we have holds the mayor back from being able to take the kind of action that people really want her to take. But at the same time, if I talk to my neighbors about what's going on at City Hall, they're talking about the potholes. They're angry that we no longer have consistent recycling and that, frankly, they can't even get their trash picked up a lot of the time. How to even begin tackling something like the charter when people are like, look at the condition of these streets?
I think we have to understand that those two things are intertwined, that the reason city services are lagging, and this isn't just true for the city of St. Louis. This is true for municipalities across the county. This is true in cities across the country. Since the pandemic, we have had struggles with hiring and retaining staff. We have to remember that when Mayor Jones took office, there was a hiring freeze that had been in place for 2 years. And during that time, even if people left, those jobs were not filled. And so she came into office with a huge deficit of kind of butts in seats, right, to be able to get the work done. And the challenge in that is hiring is left up to the Personnel Department and the Civil Service Commission. So long ago, and I think this was a right decision when this was put into our charter, the Civil Service Commission was created so that there was independence from politics in our hiring. Mayors can hire and appoint their, cabinet directors and some higher level staff. Although even in some of those situations, they have to get approvals through the Civil Service Commission. But that process was created in order to take hiring out of the political process. The challenge in that is that it has often meant that it was very slow. And some of the critiques that I hear all the time is, I submitted a resume to the city to work and I didn't get, a response back for 6 months and I already found a job.
And when you get that response back, it's like a snail mail letter.
Yes.
It seems crazy antiquated.
And it might be that you are qualified for a job, but you don't meet one of the things that's on the job list. And so they'll send you a letter and say that you're not qualified for this position, even though, if you were to go into, a nonprofit or whatever, folks would look at your resume and say you are highly qualified for this position. So that's definitely one of the challenges we're up against. The other is wages. And the city has commissioned a pay study that is nearing completion. It might be completed. I think it's going to be released pretty soon, because we know that our wages haven't kept up with where they need to be. Prior to a couple of years ago, when Mayor Jones started doing raises for city employees, we had some city employees that had not had raises in over a decade. I mean, imagine how demoralizing that is, to come to work, do the same thing year after year after year, and be making less, money. And so we're playing this massive game of catch up right now of trying to figure out, how do we move around resources in city budget to give raises to folks. And those raises still have to be approved through Civil Service Commission. They have to be approved through union negotiations. And then it goes to the Board of Aldermen, and then we approve it, and then it goes to the mayor's desk. So there's all these steps to get us there that are sometimes very slow and convoluted. And so I think our challenge going forward is figuring out how do we create a system where there's still that independence in hiring from politics, but we can be more nimble. And I think that's really what the work of the Charter Commission has to be is to answer that question, be looking at other cities and how they're doing this so that we can be more flexible and we can recruit and retain that workforce we need.
So that sounds great. That's music to my ears as a city resident. But for Mayor Jones, she had this sort of rare opportunity to get a new personnel director in there, hired somebody, very much her pick. And this went south to the point that she ended up firing this person. And now there's this huge controversy over this. This person's become a political enemy. Do you think some of her problems aren't just structural, but maybe some bad hires?
I mean, I think that there have been some hires that have not done her service. I think we've seen that in every mayoral administration, though. I know the Crewson administration struggled with that in some capacities as well. Having worked in nonprofit in a leadership capacity for about 10 years before I ran for office, sometimes you interview folks, they interview great, the resume is wonderful, they have good references, and then they get in the job and you realize they're just not a good fit. And unfortunately that happens. And I think that, I'm happy with the interim director at the moment. I think he's great. I'm hoping he can quickly get in there and do some things to kind of right the ship in that office. And then we get a long-term director in there that is going to quickly be able to modernize. And I will say some modernization has already happened. And I think we have to give some credit where credit is due. I mean, when Director Gray took over, there were still typewriters in that office.
Insane.
And so, she got that out. She I think definitely, brought in some staff in the places that needed to happen to be able to go through applications more quickly. And so I also want to recognize that there has been some good changes that have come out of that department as well.
And taking that step back to that bigger picture that I mentioned, this progressive movement in the city of St. Louis, even you, as we're talking today, I hear you talking less about sort of fighting the progressive fight and more about kind of cleaning up some of these systems so we can deal with the basics. Is that kind of the mood we're in, whether progressive or blue dog Democrat?
I mean, I don't think it's a either or. I think it's an and. And I think particularly with the assault that we're seeing from both our federal and state government at the moment, that we have to be able to walk and chew gum. Yes, the basics are important, and we cannot overlook the fact that fascism is rising in our country. And local cities are going to be the first and last line of defense in a lot of ways. When it comes to protecting our immigrant populations, it's often going to be cities that have to protect that. If the federal grant cuts end up going through, which I think we have every reason to believe that they will. We saw in the first Trump administration, he'd do something, it gets struck down in the courts, they try it again, and they just keep doing it till something finally stuck. And so I think we have to recognize that at some point in time, there are going to be some massive funding cuts. And when that happens, those services for seniors who aren't getting Social Security, those services for families who are no longer getting Head Start, or folks who are no longer getting Medicaid, that's going to fall on cities. And so we have to be able to recognize that we have to invest in our people and provide those supportive systems that are being very quickly eroded at the same time that we're focusing on improving basic services.
We're talking today to the president of the St. Louis Board of Aldermen, that is Megan Green. We'll return to that conversation in just a moment. We're talking about these cuts that are coming out of the Trump administration. Perfect segue maybe to talk about the Rams settlement funds, which are still there to be administered. But first, this episode of the 314 podcast is sponsored by C-Edge Learn. C-Edge Learn offers cutting-edge online courses in high-demand topics like cybersecurity, geographic information systems, and other emerging technologies designed for students, educators, and institutions. Their self-paced, mobile-friendly courses are built for high-demand skills, making learning accessible and effective. Whether you're looking to advance your career, increase your teaching resources, or provide your institution with future-ready skills, CEdge Learn has you covered. Visit cedgelearn.com to learn more. And now back to our conversation with Megan Green. She is the president of the St. Louis Board of Aldermen. We've been talking about the mayor's race. She's endorsed Mayor Tashara Jones and is making the case for her reelection. One of the biggest issues, though, that you've been dealing with, President Green, is these RAM settlement funds. So the city now has $294 million to spend. There was this compromise proposal sort of cobbled together with what various factions on the board wanted. This debate was fierce, and it ended without any plan being able to get enough support for passage. So looking back on this 2 months later, what do you think went wrong?
I think there's been a lot of kind of competing factors throughout this entire process. First, I want to kind of go back to the beginning. When we launched the RAM settlement engagement process, we did so recognizing that there's a lot of distrust in the Board of Aldermen. I got elected out of scandal, and part of our job has to be to build better relationships between the board and community. And so one of the ways that you can do that is by doing public engagement and then demonstrating to the public that you're actually listening to that public engagement. And so the public came to us and they said, we want investment in our water department. We want investment in disadvantaged communities or disinvested communities. We want investment in downtown. We want investment in childcare. We want investment in infrastructure. And so then it became up to us to figure out how do we fit all of those things together in one piece that would work. And city workers. I left that one out. They wanted investment in city workers as well. And so what we attempted to do was to try to craft a proposal that would meet all of those needs and show how all of those things intersect with each other. And I think we were on the verge of introducing our bill when, Greater St. Louis came forward with their piece of legislation.
They had a certain amount of money they wanted for downtown. They also chose some other neighborhoods. And
yes,
this you thought it was premature.
I definitely thought it was premature. The bill was filed the week before our last public engagement meeting, which I think was very strategic on their part, because they knew that a bill would be coming shortly after that public engagement ended. And so what we saw is I think, some members of the board not wanting to make a decision during an election year. And I think we have to be honest about that. They didn't want to be caught between what the community wanted and what Greater St. Louis wanted. And I think that's a very rational thought. I think, the week before we brought this to the floor is when the funding freeze was passed through through executive order with the Trump administration.
That had a lot of people questioning, how can we go do something that maybe feels less critical when we're going to have all these critical needs?
Yes. And so there was definitely, I think, a pullback of members at the board who were saying, wait a minute, we don't know what our city finances are going to look like in, a month or a year. And so should we really, press pause and see how this all shakes out? Because in addition to those funding cuts, economists are thinking that because of the tariffs and all the layoffs, we are headed for, some financial uncertainty with the local control of the police department being taken away. And
now there's a certain amount we have to spend on our police department. It's literally like enshrined in law now.
Exactly. So there's just a lot of unknowns at the moment. And as we've continued to meet with alder people throughout the break, that's what we're hearing from folks is that, I think we should, maybe pause, or if we're going to spend it, let's maybe spend half of it and keep the rest in reserves, because we don't know what is going to happen with this administration. We don't know what federal cuts we're going to see. And if all of our federal money for the city goes away, that is $162 million that is gone from our city budget overnight.
Every year.
Every year.
Wow.
And that is not taking into account the direct funding that Head Start centers get and food banks get and all these other social service agencies that provide very vital services in our community. It doesn't even account for that. And so I think it is wise at this point.
So you think that mood has changed? I know when you sort of put the pause on 2 months ago, it was like, okay, we will come back. There will be a new mayor. We'll pick this back up. the ground has shifted?
I think the ground has definitely shifted, and I think our state and federal dynamics have a lot to do with that. And I applaud for members of the board for, thinking in that way. I think from the very beginning, we've all said we want to make sure that these funds are something that we don't just spend and we look back in 10 or 15 years and say, well, that was fun, but, have nothing long term to show for it. So I think we now have an opportunity to take a pause and think a little bit more long term about how these funds can be used to create a resilient city, one that can weather these storms regardless of, federal or state administrations.
So I think it's fair to say you were kind of upset when this deal fell apart. You later made some remarks on Facebook that you have since apologized for. You know, as this process fell apart on this compromise bill, do you look back on this now as a blessing in disguise?
In some ways, I do. I mean, at the time, it was really frustrating because you spend, months and months and months trying to engage every member of the board. And what is it that you want to see? What do you need to get to yes? That's kind of the motto of our office is how can we get you to yes? And kind of being met with a lot of moving goalposts throughout the process, which is, part of the political process. Let's be real about that. But I think in hindsight, it probably was the best thing. If you believe in a higher power, there might have been somebody there that day saying, you know what, let's take a little pause here because what is yet to come might not be great. And we need to be thinking long term for the benefit of the city.
So the remarks that you made there about your colleague Joel Vollmer accused him of having been drinking on the floor or being drunk at the meeting. And, he took great umbrage at this. He has said fairly recently that he is still looking into whether he could have a defamation claim there. Should that make people doubt your judgment that you would have come forward with something like this in a Facebook comment of all things that could end up causing some problems for the city? And certainly it feels like it impacted your relationship with the board.
I mean, I think that the important thing is, can our leaders apologize and take ownership when they do something wrong? And I think I've demonstrated that. I definitely said something that I regret. I should have taken my concerns to him directly. I was very frustrated with the rowdy nature of that meeting that day. And I look back on that and recognize that I did not stand up to the standards that I hold for myself. And I can't go back and change it, but what I can do is take accountability for it and work to, improve relationships as we move forward.
Have you taken some steps where you feel like you and Joe are going to be good going forward?
I mean, I think so. From my point of view, yes. We also know that he's not going to be at the Board of Aldermen. He's retiring.
He's happily retiring.
He's very happily retiring. And so, we are going to have a different board in a few weeks with some different members. And so that will come with different dynamics as well. And so it's this constant, process to kind of figure out how you work with every member of the board.
What kind of relationship do you think you'd have with a Mayor Kara Spencer?
I mean, I will work with anybody who wants to do good public policy. And I will say that, one of the things that I've done since being president of the Board of Aldermen is we do meetings with alder people several times per year. We're doing them now. We do them right before the beginning of session, and we do them when we go on winter break to say, hey, what are you working on? What can we work on in collaboration? What are the things we can be helpful with? And that is an approach that I take to everyone. It's one that I've taken to Mayor Jones, and I will take it to a Mayor Spencer too, hoping to find those areas of alignment. And I will always say that I will put the people of the city of St. Louis first. And if there's policy that's being forwarded that I don't think is good for the city, I'm not going to go along with it just to, be friendly. And I don't think anybody should.
What do you see as your biggest goal for the next 2 years?
I think that's a great question. So over the last 2 years, we've done a tremendous amount of housing work, and we've reformed our tax incentive system. We've seen the number of tax abatements be issued cut in half. What I would like to see going forward, though, is some of the framework that we've used to be able to do that. I think we need to codify it now that we know that it's kind of done its intended thing of making development more community oriented. So to that end, I would like to see some kind of community benefits that are enshrined in law. So when developers come to the city, they know, I'm choosing between affordable housing set aside or a contribution to the school district or infrastructure improvements, or they know what the rules of the game are. So I think that's one of the things. Second thing is continuing along the housing front is we passed we have done right to counsel program. We created an impacted tenants fund. We created a rental registry. We added mold to our building codes. So that
The absence of mold, I hope, has been added to the building code.
so that can now be a citable offense. And so the next step in all of that is a tenant bill of rights, which is essentially a know your rights requirement, so that when landlords are renting, that part of their application process is showing that they have told their residents where you make a complaint to the city if there are building code violations, how you access the right to counsel fund, how you access impacted tenants funds. And so our renters are informed of all the great policy that we've supported. And then, the last thing I'll say is we have to continue the work around the Charter Commission. And I do expect that Velasquez's city manager bill will be coming back up. And I think there's a lot of interest in that amongst members of the Board of Aldermen. And Alderwoman Spencer was supportive of it at the board. And so I think that there's opportunity to move some of those bigger reforms like that forward as well.
So we've talked about a lot of serious policy and political stuff here. In our final minute, I want to also ask you about something more personal.
Sure.
And that is, you very recently got married. You're almost literally just back from your honeymoon.
Yes.
What is your best memory from that whole whirlwind, I imagine?
I mean, it was, all of it has been amazing. We, for 20 years, my family and I have been going to Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. And when I brought my husband there for the first time, he said, okay, this is where we need to get married. And so it was kind of a quick wedding. We had, his family and my family had been planning to spend Christmas there already. And so a couple months out, we looked at each other and said, they're already going to be there and we want to get married there. So why don't we just do that? And
super low key.
yes. And so it was just, on a beach, immediate family. It was so nice and peaceful, and just getting to kind of integrate our families together and have them be able to spend some quality time together and really get to know each other. Our parents are so similar. It's really kind of hilarious. But it was absolutely wonderful. So I'm still in the honeymoon stage.
Well, we want to thank you for joining us and also just wish you a congratulations and that exciting new venture.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
That was Megan Green, president of the St. Louis Board of Aldermen, who joined us Monday. We talked about elections and city services, and those aren't the only things that have people riled up in the city of St. Louis. And that is the focus of the kicker. In recent weeks, a broad swath of city residents have gotten postcards in the mail telling them that the appraised value of their homes has gone up, in some cases way up. St. Louis Magazine staff writer Ryan Kroll broke the story explaining what's going on and why. And he joins us now. Ryan Kroll, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So, Ryan, what's driving these increases in the appraised value of many local homes?
Sure. So basically, these houses were underassessed for many years. And now there's people who own these houses who are kind of experiencing like a whiplash as they kind of had these underassessed properties and they were paying lower property taxes than they would have otherwise. Now, all of a sudden, they're where they, quote unquote, should be. And that's quite the, sort of shock to have this huge increase that should have happened kind of in increments over several years happen all at once.
And this is driven by the sales prices in these neighborhoods?
That's part of it. Basically, the guy who's the current assessor, he's kind of filling in on a sort of interim basis after Mike Dolphin left, Sean Ordway. What Sean told me was that basically there was just a flaw in the way that the city was assessing a certain kind of like modestly priced house in certain parts of the city. And it had to do with like kind of a wonky thing where like these criteria that they would, sort of determine the assessments on, they just were putting the houses essentially like in the wrong box in terms of like, is the house in poor condition, fair, good, that kind of thing. They oftentimes were just making a mistake in sort of listing the houses not being in as good of a condition as it actually was. which led to sort of a bunch of different types of properties kind of all in this one sort of bucket, these sort of, like $100,000-ish houses in parts of Southeast City, to be, the city thought they were worth less than they actually were. The city realized they had a problem in 2021, took them a few years to fix it. It's a really laborious process to like assess 10,000 houses. So that's why it's just now in 2025 that people are getting these postcards saying, hey, you're going to owe a lot more money at the end of the year than, you have in previous years.
So how much more are we talking? How is this going to play out on these bills?
That's a really good question. So I know, for instance, like if you have, if your house goes from like $100,000 to $200,000, your property taxes are going to double. And one woman I talked to said that one of her rental properties quintupled.
Oh boy, that's going to hurt.
Exactly. So it would go from like, I don't know, roughly, she was probably paying around like $300 because the house is only in the city's eyes worth $20,000. So now she's going to be hit with something like what, $1,500. There's a few different ways to look at that. On the one hand, she's paying a lot more this year. She has been paying less than she has been paying less than she should have been in previous years. But I can tell you which of those two sort of facts she's kind of more concerned about herself, and very rightfully so.
Well, sure, I don't blame her. And I'm also thinking, the specific example you've brought up, this is a woman who has rental properties. She's going to have to pass this on to her tenants.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to increase the cost of what it costs to rent an apartment in St. Louis.
Totally. And for, one person that maybe in the grand scheme of things, maybe not that big of a deal, but you have, I think it was either 9 or 10,000. So you kind of in aggregate, like this will really probably have some big downstream effects for these specific neighborhoods.
So as I was talking to President Green about, voters seem to be kind of angry about how things are going. They want more urgency in solving the city's problems. Now you get maybe like as many as 10,000 people being told they're getting a big hike in what they have to pay for property taxes. This seemed like really bad timing with the mayoral election coming up. Why this timing? Is there a conspiracy here?
Yeah, I mean, I almost wish there were, because that's a much better story. But so by state law, the assessor has to notify anyone whose house's assessed value is going up by more than 15%. So if it's going up by like 400%, obviously you have to get that notification. And what Sean told me was that they're prioritizing folks who are having these big hikes first. So they're notifying them towards the beginning of the year.
So they have time to prepare.
Exactly, because the tax bill won't be due until December 31st. So the people who are going to have the kind of biggest crunch, he wanted to give the most time to kind of ready themselves, which does happen to coincide with a mayoral election. I don't get your tinfoil hat out. I don't know. Yeah, but I don't.
It feels like more bad news for Mayor Tishaura Jones. People are more likely to blame the incumbent, even though everything you're telling me here, this has nothing to do with her office.
Totally. It's just, I mean, it's kind of another stroke of bad luck in a cycle that has been filled with them for the mayor.
So what if people feel like they've been assessed unfairly? Is there anything they can do?
Yeah, so basically everyone whose house is going to go up by more than 15%, an inspector is or probably already has come by to inspect the exterior of the building. And if you feel like your assessed value went up too much, you can ask someone from the city to come in and inspect the interior too. And then they'll kind of make a more informed decision about how much your house is actually worth. And what Sean told me too was if you're worried about like the inspector coming in and seeing how nice your house is and maybe bumping it up a little bit further, he says that's highly unlikely to happen. There'd have to be a bunch of like gold-plated stuff and stuff that's just impossible to ignore for that to happen. They're not looking to kind of put the pinch on anyone more than they already have.
Yeah, more than they already have, I think, is the key phrase here. St. Louis Magazine staff writer Ryan Kroll, thank you for joining us.
Sure thing.
I'm Sarah Fensky, and that's the 314 for today. You can find out more in our podcast show notes and at stlmag.com. You can also find me and Ryan Kroll every day in your inbox. That's thanks to St. Louis Magazine's fantastic free newsletter, St. Louis Daily. It's a fresh take on St. Louis with insight and original reporting, much of it by Ryan. Sign up at stlmag.com/newsletters. The 314 is a production of St. Louis Magazine. I'm Sarah Fensky, and this is The 314. See you next time.